it's really interesting that the perspective that you both shared about this idea of, it almost seems like we're stuck in a paradigm, whether that be using the GDP, whether that be kind of, as you were saying, Dr. Howard, about we're focused on an outcome, and are the measurements, the tools that we're using leading us to the outcome we want. My old boss, when I was in corporate, used to say, you only measure and spend money on the things you care about. So whatever your value statement is, if you're not measuring it and if you're not spending money on it, that's really not your values. So I think what I hear a lot from what you guys are saying is that really where we think we want to go, it's not it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like the systems that we have in place, whether it be how we allocate funds, how we set up the policies, how we measure the effectiveness of those policies, seem to be leading us further into more inequity, deeper into the climate crisis. Am I on the right track here, Randy?
Well, absolutely. And I just want to sort of echo what Dr. Howard was saying about the GDP. The thing about the GDP is it's happy about bad things and it's happy about good things in equal measure. It doesn't really care about such things. In the neighborhood where I live, there's a brick house that's being torn down, and it is a house that is in perfect shape. And it's just being demolished so that something bigger and more expensive should be put there. But the resources that are being wasted and lost through that destruction, I've always said that the city or the province should have something called an Office of Embedded Costs, which is that it's an organization that measures things that you are destroying in order to move forward. And talking about the cleanup of tailings ponds and things like that, and old abandoned oil wells, is very clear that we have not included those in our calculations. And yeah, there's no question that measuring things by GDP is far from perfect.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any comments about that further, Dr. Howard?
Well, I think it's useful to just really look for a second at inequality, because it's essentially toxic to society. There is nothing good about it. You know, when you really read about it for a while, it's worse for mental and physical health. It decreases trust within a society, so it makes it tougher for us to get along and govern ourselves. It reduces markers of women's empowerment. It's worse for child health. It has increased levels of criminality. And when we look at, for instance, the US response to the coronavirus crisis, we see how when a society is that unequal, they're unable to mount a effective response to an emergency. So it's really not even good for the rich people, because they couldn't get the tests either, and they were exposed by the higher prevalence of the virus everywhere. And so I think when we're looking for a North Star where we need to go, you know, there's you know, people feel awkward about proposing something like a wealth tax, but when you look at it and you're like, you know what, that's just contributing to inequality. That is doing us no good. It is not heading in the right direction. So how about we, you know, do a little bit of redistribution, have a wealth tax, use that to help fund a guaranteed basic income. I think I hadn't spent that much time prior to the last couple of months really reading about inequality, but the more you read, the more you realize that we really need to just be taking step by step away from that for everybody's benefit.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in on that inequality and taxation. I mean, this is, when we fought in World War II, we didn't just not freak out about debt. We also brought in really good taxation measures. There was an excess profits tax. There were all kinds of taxes that we should revisit again. You know, looking at COVID, one of the things people maybe don't realize is if you made less than $48 an hour when the pandemic started, you lost money. Yeah, you did. You probably lost work. If you made less than $16 an hour, 50% of the population either lost their job or lost the majority of their hours. But for people making over $48 an hour, they're actually making more money now than when it started, which is a strange thing. But these are the people who are able to work from home, continue doing their professional jobs, continue making the same money, even get overtime because there's a crisis. And at the same time, they don't quite have as many things to spend money on. So they're not taking trips to the Bahamas. They're not renovating their kitchens because they can't get carpenters to come in, whatever. They're not spending money in the same way. And yet that wealth is accumulating there. And so there is definitely an opportunity for us to look at more progressive taxation. The latest study from the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives about the top 100 CEOs in Canada shows that their income is 227 times that of the average Canadian full-time, full-year worker, 227 times. So we have to look at actually making better use of the wealth that's in this country. When you listen to people talk about public finance, you often get the impression, oh, wow, we must be broke. Canada must be broke. We must be in terrible shape. But the fact is, the record, and again, sorry to use GDP, but the record wealth moment in Canada was 2018. It wasn't 1967 in terms of economic activity per capita. But if you are getting 20 hours a week working at a grocery store, or you're making $19 an hour working in a long-term care facility, you're going to feel that the country must be poor. It's not poor. I rode my bike to work today. I drove by in what used to be an ordinary neighborhood. I drove by a Maserati. It's a $150,000 sports car just sitting on the street. Like, who needs a $150,000 sports car? If that's not a signal that we need to start taxing the actual wealth in this country, I don't know what is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think it's interesting too that, you know, I was reading something by an economist that I follow on Twitter, and talking a lot about what you were saying, Randy, and of course you as well, Dr. Howard touched on it, about how this particular COVID, not only how it's affected people differently from a health point of view, but also an economic point of view. And that certain people, as you were saying, Randy, depending on their wage, but also depending on their gender and where they live, you know, they're experiencing it much differently. And then it's interesting to see how various governments, I mean, at different levels, are kind of going back to these solutions of let's build bridges, let's build roads, let's get at, you know, the construction side. I'm not saying this is for every government, but I'm watching various provincial and municipal responses. And it's really interesting to go back into that. This is how we solve these economic crises. We just build stuff. We're like, you remember the Fraggle Rock, the dozers that used to build those crystal structures? It was just like, we don't know what else to do. Let's just keep building. And it sometimes to me seems very haphazard. And I'm thinking, if you're looking at helping people that are low wage workers, if you're looking at helping people that are maybe more racialized or women, then the recovery seems to me it would have to be different than our quote unquote standard approach, especially in light of a climate crisis and these kind of health hazards. What do you think, Dr. Howard?